Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And welcome to our college football episode. We got the first week of college football rankings that just came out, so we'll have a little diatribe about those. The biggest thing that I noticed was the committee was talking about just going from the top down. Like, I have no problem with Oregon being ranked number 1. So then it came down to Ohio State was 2, Georgia was 3. The committee members talked about it, and they go, well, both have good road wins. Ohio State beat Penn State, and Georgia beat Texas. But then they each have a loss. Ohio State lost to Oregon, who's the number 1 team, but Georgia lost to Alabama, who's the number 11. And so they rated them like that, which, if that's how the committee wants to do it, I can sit back and go, I'm cool with that. But then, if you go further down the list, you get to the 2 unbeatens of Indiana and BYU. BYU's beat SMU, who's the number 13 team in the committee's rankings. But somehow BYU's rated less.
Yeah, well, so BYU is not getting any love because most of the teams that they've played aren't ranked now. But as far as like when you're talking about like top 25 wins, again, when you're looking back and using the logic that the committee does of like, oh, well, they beat them when they were ranked, blah, 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 all those different things that we talk about every week. Like, BYU has multiple good wins over top 25 teams. I mean, still good teams. We're not talking about Florida State here, teams that like were ranked and now are just like everybody's beating them. Like, we're talking about like Kansas State, SMU. I mean, like, they're beating plenty of teams that have been ranked and for some reason aren't getting any love. And this is my take on it, is like, one, I agree with you, they should be above Indiana. But like, I'm taking it a step further and going like, well, why is Miami ranked that high, right? Why? Probably because they're undefeated, right? Like, they're higher ranked and they're undefeated, which I'm cool with, like, right? Like, I don't have a problem with Ohio State necessarily being 2 because, again, the same logic that you used. But, like, I'm putting BYU and Indiana all the way up to, like, definitely ahead of Tennessee and Penn State. Maybe not in front of Texas. That's where it kind of gets a little gray, and I would have to dig a little further into the weeds. But, like, for them to be at 8 and 9 and then the way they're flipped, that's just a travesty. Like, what's Tennessee done? Tell me what Tennessee's done. One, they're not even undefeated, right? And to me, that means something when you're playing in a Power 5 conference. And if their loss was to, like, Georgia or, like in Ohio State's case, Oregon, where it's the number 1 team in the nation, got it. But who did Tennessee lose to?
Arkansas,
right? Like, what are we talking about here? They beat Bama. I got it. Like, that means a lot to Tennessee. I get it. I'm not taking that away.
But it's not the same Bama.
Again, and when you're talking about rankings, right, like, you use that same ranking, you use that same logic of, like, why Georgia is, behind Ohio State or vice versa. But part of the reason was, like, well, because Bama's back, out. Bama's not even in it right now.
Well, they are. They're at number 11.
Oh, well, still, I'm talking about, like, they're not in that, like, top 4 discussion, correct, right? But it's like, so that win shouldn't carry that much weight for Tennessee. That doesn't make any sense. You can't do both in the same ranking. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I agree. I mean, my biggest issue is that even with, I agree with you. It's like, why is Miami ranked above Texas? Like, because you're going to say, well, they're undefeated. And it's like, okay, well, who's Miami played? I can give them credit for beating Louisville. Louisville just beat Clemson. However, outside of that, like, where's their good win? Are you going to tell me it's at Florida? Because then you got FMAU, Ball State, USFL, Virginia Tech, Cal, the only school that Florida State's beat, at Louisville, Florida State, Duke. And if you really want to start talking about it, they should have lost to Virginia Tech and they should have lost to Cal.
No, like, they've struggled. I'm not taking that. Like, I'm not they're not passing the eye test by any stretch of the imagination.
And I'm not saying they should be eliminated from the college football playoff for not passing the eye test. They've done more than Bama has. They've won the games that were tight. Like, I will give Miami credit. But then this is where I go back to the Indiana BYU. It's like, are we really just going to dog these two programs? Because, like, they still played in the Big Ten. They still beat the same opponents that Ohio State's
Is
beat.
the ACC better than the Big 12 or the Big 10?
Yeah.
Like, are we for real right now? Like, no. Like, it's the same. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I don't get. They're not applying the rules that they're saying they're using equally across the field.
Well, that's why I brought you guys up that point last week of Nebraska. It's like Nebraska played a very close game with Ohio State. Nebraska the week prior got absolutely shellacked by Indiana. It's like we have a common opponent. I get that Indiana hasn't played Oregon, but they have played the same opponent in Nebraska. You would think that maybe that's why they pushed them ahead of BYU, but at the same point, I just go, this is where the committee, I can't emphasize this enough. We said it last year. Everyone's like 12 teams is going to make it better. No, it's not. It's just going to create more drama. The top 5 conference champs will be easy. That will be softballs they're in. But outside of that, you sit back and you go, dude, it's going to be chaos of who these next teams are.
Well, even more so when there's such biases towards certain conferences. And I get it. Like, yes, the top 4 conference champs, highest rated conference champs immediately get that bye. But at the same time, like, when you have situations like this, you got BYU all the way down at like 9, but because they're winning the Big 12, they have to get one of those. Like, that alone causes, a discussion or causes problems in those rankings, because now you've got a team that isn't top 4 getting into one of those spots. So
Correct.
It's like, okay, well, now where do we put these other teams? You know what I mean? Like, that's what, and you kind of brought this up earlier of like, you get into the conspiracy theories of like, oh, we're going to put Ohio State here. That way we're going to rank them number 5. And now they got the easiest path to the CFP going, or at least a rematch to Oregon kind of thing as it stands now. But,
yeah, because right now they would play Boise State, number 5 versus 12. The winner of that would play BYU, and the winner of that would most likely play Oregon.
Which you could argue of the top 4, you would have Oregon, Georgia, Miami, and BYU. As far as eye test goes, BYU is probably the team you would want to play. Maybe Miami you could make an argument for, but with Cam Ward doing Heisman things, you just never know. So that's what you're playing, the number 12 team, and then the easiest of the 4 conference champions. Like, again, you start getting to the conspiracy theory stuff there, but
which I sit back in the thing that we were talking about before starting the podcast. This is the picture that like I want to paint is, let's say that chaos happens this weekend. Let's say Ole Miss beats Georgia and wins out. Ole Miss still wouldn't get into the SEC championship on most. There's some scenarios that they possibly could, but I would say from a standpoint of probability, they don't. What do you do then? Like, where do you put Ole Miss? Ole Miss right now is sitting 16th. If they beat the number 3 Georgia next week, it's like, yeah, they're probably going to end up into the top 12. So what do you do with Georgia? Is Georgia pretty much sealed right now? Is Georgia's going to be one of those teams? And I would argue the same for Ohio State. Like, if Ohio State loses to Indiana, what's going to happen? They're just going to flip Indiana and Ohio State. Like, Ohio State's getting in the playoffs. Like, when you look at the top teams, and this is where I sit back and I go, the thing that we talked about at the beginning of the season, that Georgia could lose 3 games and they were pretty much in, we're seeing it unfold.
yeah, like it's playing out.
Yes, it for sure is playing out. Like, the game to Ole Miss only matters to Ole Miss in terms, because for Georgia, honestly, it was probably better to lose the game. Why? Get a home playoff game. I don't have to go play someone else in the SEC championship. I don't have to get beat up by either A&M or Texas or someone else. I can just bypass that, get a home game in Athens. And for anyone that's like they want the bye. Everyone's getting a bye. You're either playing a conference championship, getting a bye, and then waiting on the next round, or you don't play the conference championship and that's your bye to then play a playoff game at home. Like the idea, it's completely different from the NFL. Like whoever gets the number 1 seed, like you truly do have a week off. This you don't. It's just like it's a mirage of having a bye. So it's what would you rather have?
I'm going to throw another one out there. Let's say, because at this point I think it's BYU and Iowa State that would play in the Big 12 championship. Let's say BYU's undefeated going in that game, and Iowa State's a 1-loss team. But let's say Iowa State wins. They're now the Big 12 champ. They have to get in. But they're like number 17th or something right now.
You think they're going to put BYU in?
That's what I'm saying. Like, you just drop BYU all the way out for losing a conference championship when you're going to have like a 2-loss Ole Miss team getting in, or like a 2-loss Tennessee possibly
or a 2-loss Alabama.
Yeah, like
they lost to Vanderbilt.
That's what I'm saying. Like, where are these rankings coming from? It doesn't make any sense.
And this is where I just talk about the chaos going forward. Like, I can sit back and I look at Oregon, and if the last year was unique outside of the Bama-Georgia game in the SEC championship, and what I mean by that is everyone won. Now, it was even more unique because Florida State won, and you left out an undefeated conference champ to put Bama in. You sit back, you look, or if Indiana beats Michigan this weekend, sets up the showdown undefeated with Ohio State, and somehow gets past them, they play Oregon in the Big Ten championship, both undefeated. It's like, at that point, Indiana's in. Like, you can't leave Indiana out.
They would 100% leave Indiana out.
But for Ohio State?
Yes.
But they just beat Ohio State. Like, that's what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying. And it doesn't, they're going to use the logic of like, well, Ohio State's loss was to the number 1 team.
By 1 point. Well, they both lose to Oregon.
But then Indiana would be like, well, are you okay? Because you're saying Indiana beats Ohio State?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like, if they both end up in the Big Ten championship, Indiana, Oregon, undefeated. Like, the only scenario of which I could see them dropping Indiana somehow out is if Oregon won by like 40 points. And they're like, well, Ohio State only lost by 1, so that's what we changed.
Let's just say Indiana loses to Ohio State, though. You know Indiana has fallen way out of the contention.
Absolutely.
But you look at it's like their schedules are basically identical. You would say Ohio State played Oregon, which is the number 1 team in the nation. Indiana played Ohio State, which is the number 2 team in the nation. How do you drop one so significantly far out, and most people won't bat an eye at it, but Ohio State, because they're Ohio State, somehow still the number 2 team in the nation? Like, it's wild. And again, I don't have the problem with Ohio State right now being number 2. It's just that these rankings always seem to like never get applied equally across even in the same conference. It's hard enough to do it cross conference, but they don't even do it in their same conference.
I agree. The funny thing is the team that I would argue probably has the best chance of getting in right now is Notre Dame. It's like, for as bad as that loss was to Northern Illinois, like, it is so far removed. Like, we're not even talking about it. It's just like, and this is what I went to with you and Pops last week, is we love to rank good wins, but we never really sort of talk about like where losses fall. We always just view it as binary. It's either a 1 or a 0. We never break down losses. But A&M has a great win. Notre Dame has a great win against A&M. They got a really good boost with Louisville this weekend, beating Clemson. So they have that. They beat Navy, which I would argue is not a great win now. Navy just lost to Rice. Like, this is one of my conspiracy theories. Like, Navy got pushed into the top 25. Why? To be another top 25 win for Notre Dame. They play Florida State next, Wolf, Virginia, and then they play Army. Like, what's funny is USC, that last game of the season.
The best thing we can hope for is that USC can come out, one, for my own sanity, but then just to get Notre Dame out of the playoff.
It's like, for you, if USC beats Notre Dame, that's like making birdie on 18 at a terrible round of golf.
You're like shooting 105 or something like that, and then you make a birdie on 18. You're like, yeah, I do know what I'm doing.
You know what? I love this game.
Yeah, I'm coming back. That'll save Lincoln Riley's job.
Dude, side note, this is college football related, so I feel good about talking about this. I floated this to Pops, and you had heard, we just filmed the NFL episode earlier. I floated that when USC eventually fires Lincoln Riley this offseason,
Which should be at the end of the season.
that should be the offensive coordinator of the Bears. You pair him with Caleb Williams. He no longer has to worry about defense.
Wow.
Like, it's the Lincoln Riley, or not the Lincoln Riley, the Cliff Kingsbury effect on Jaden Daniels.
Absolutely.
You pair him.
They have the connection. Yeah. Dude, that's not a bad plan.
Instead of firing your head coach in Eberflus, you go, no, you're going to go hire Lincoln Riley to be your OC.
Yeah.
Like, we solve it that way. Keep coaching a good defense. Because, and the only reason I say this is USC has to part ways with Lincoln Riley. There's no...
at this point, like, after beating LSU to start the season, it was like maybe he saved his job. Personally, he had 2 feet in the grave, not even 1 foot. He had 2 feet in the grave 2 years ago when he brought Grinch back, and their defense was even worse when that second season with Caleb Williams.
I remember.
That should have been the end of it.
I got some phone calls of you just angry right now.
That should have been the end of it then, of just like, okay, we gave you the shot. You clearly made the bad choice. You had all these weapons. You got a returning Heisman Trophy, and you did nothing with it. You actually got worse. You're done. This year, open the season, defense looks better. Okay, we win a game against LSU. All right, maybe he saved his job. Clearly, no. He can't get it done. Great offensive coordinator, quarterback whisper. He's doing the best he can with Miller Moss. Miller Moss is not the guy, but whatever he's doing as a head coach is not working, period, dot. Play calling, winning. It's not like we don't have the talent. We've been in every single game we've played. All of our games, I think our combined loss score is like sub 20. You know what I mean? Like all 4 or 5 of our losses are combined for less than 20 points, as a total. So we're in the games, but you still got to win them. And he's not doing that. Got to go. You had your time. You're not getting it done. Got to go.
The difficult part, we were talking about this on the phone the other day with Lincoln Riley. The mid-season fire is difficult, and it's because unless you have a coach lined up right now, all you're doing is possibly hurting recruiting, which I would argue it's a possibility it's an inevitable whether you fire him now or at the end of the season. If you fire him now, at least you have kids that you know are coming to USC because they want to be at USC regardless of who the head coach is. But if you fire them at the end of the season, you always risk kids that were like, no, I was coming here for Lincoln. I don't like the turmoil. Now, you said the coach, which I sit back and I go, that's the coach.
I'm going to do my best impression. Let me see if you can get, he's showing him what to do. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Ed Orgeron.
Yeah, bring him back, dude.
Which he was supposed to be the guy.
He was our interim for a while. And then they were like,
the players loved him.
They loved him. He did so well. And they were like, no, we'd rather have Clay Helton.
And you were like, well, I don't know if Ed would come back. And I'm like, Jimbo Fisher would come back in a heartbeat. If you want to pay me $100 million guaranteed, like Ed Orgeron will be your savior.
I get what you're saying. I'm with you. Like, I don't like the midseason firing, especially if you don't already have a coach lined up, because all you're doing is just like, it's really like the you're just giving up. Like, you're just absolutely throwing in the towel at that point. I don't like that. So I say yes, let him finish this season. With the recruiting thing, yes, I get it, but at the same time, like, you know what hurts recruiting too? Losing all these damn games. You know what I mean? Like, you can keep losing games, and people are just like, well, maybe I don't want to go to USC. I don't care who the head coach is. They can't win games. You know what I mean? If anything, you get rid of Lincoln Riley, and someone who was like maybe on the fence or like, oh, they're losing a lot of games, I don't know if I want to go there. You get rid of Lincoln Riley, and they're like, okay, let's see who they bring in, and I'll stay committed because I do want to go to USC.
So I'll compare Lincoln to Sark because we sort of had this same conversation. I was telling you, like, when they hired Lincoln, it was like the thing that Lincoln has to do is immediately come out and win. because it helps recruiting. Like, kids want to go to a school that's competing. And that he did that. Yes, they couldn't beat Utah. I get that. But the loss to Tulane killed them in a meaningless bowl game, because it set this like precedence. However, like with Sark in Texas, it's like they couldn't get to the championship either. They lost to Washington, but it was like, we're right there. Like, it was just a different set of losses. Like, if they had went out and beat Tulane, I really do think that it's different for USC right now,
dude.
But it's just so like these wins. What I just want to back up your point of what kills a program even more is losing. Like, losing to Maryland, losing to Minnesota, losing to Washington. It's like, dude, these are awful wins. Like, no one wants to come play for you doing this, and it's one of these ones. That's why I just say he's fired at the end of the season.
Our defense isn't even really that much. They're not that good this year. They're obviously much better. But if we had the defense this year that we have 2 years ago with Caleb Williams' Heisman Trophy year,
probably the national championship,
we're at least making it to the ship. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just like,
it's y'all versus Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the sad part about it, is like, you're that close to, starting that new dynasty, right? Like, we already had Sark. Sark came to USC and he did terrible, right? Like, it's just, you're always that.
Tequila had something to do with that.
It is what it is. But like, you're always that close to making or breaking or like starting that new dynasty. But it's like these little things. Part of it is because of the decision, right? Like, and to have that Heisman Trophy winner and have like this season of going like, man, if we just had a little bit of if we could just stop anybody from scoring 50 points on us, we could win a game. And then bringing back that same, like, that was his decision, right? Like, if he would have brought in a new defensive coordinator that second year, you would understand, like, he's at least trying, he's making efforts, right? Like, you allow time for those changes to take place, but it's like, bro, you brought back the same guy. That's on you. Not even like as a head, that was like your decision to do that. And it got even worse. Like, you are just a bad head coach. Period. Dot. There's no other way to put that. You can't stay.
Yeah, he dug his own grave.
The problem with USC now too, though, is that they're playing in the Big Ten, and I mean, like, that's not winning a whole lot of recruiting favors. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of guys that are like, yeah, I want to travel the country every other week and go to the Midwest where it's freezing cold. You know what I mean?
It doesn't help either that now, the head of Nike is, I forget what his name is.
Phil Knight
is like unlimited pocketbook for NIL. It's like, guess what? Of the teams that left the Pac-12, you look at all four of them with UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington. It's like, who's primed? Oregon. If they get to right now, if they win the Big Ten championship, even if they fall short of the national championship, I promise you the recruiting will be unhinged this offseason. They will pick up recruits because Phil Knight's like, no, we're right on the doorstep. Recruits are like, I want to go play for Oregon. They have crazy uniforms. I'm getting paid $1 million to show up, even though I'm a third string wide receiver because Phil Knight has Nike. I'm $1 billion owner. Oh, who knows? Maybe they'll give me free Jordans. Like, that's what Oregon will do. So I just want to throw that out. But I want to go back to your point because I was thinking about this while you were talking. Like, I sit back and I look at the rankings and we talk about, like, well, what if Indiana drops one to Ohio State? It's like, well, what do you think's more of an option? Do you think that if Indiana with one loss being left out of the Big Ten championship gets left out of the playoff, or do you think that if Texas loses to Texas A&M and gets left out of the SEC championship, like, who's going to get left out in that scenario? And this is what I talk about. Like, Indiana's going to get left out. Like, if you think that they're going to leave Texas, a big name program, out,
no doubt.
You're crazy.
No doubt.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
So instead of going through game by game, we really haven't done that at all with college. I'll just leave it up to you like this because I think this is a little fun. Let's just take the current playoff bracket of who you think would win.
Let me just, I want to just, one more team I want to just talk about is SMU. We didn't really talk about them. They're not getting any love either. Yes, they have one loss, right? Who was that loss
BYU.
to? BYU, a current undefeated conference leader. And SMU, again, has some decent ranked wins.
They're being punished for having a harder schedule.
But, like...
They shouldn't be behind Bama.
Yes. Okay, and I'm glad you said it. And I didn't want to, like, attack you, but, like, when I'm looking at, like, where these teams fall, Bama has 2 losses. That's more than one. And one of their losses is to Vanderbilt.
And I look at the same with Boise State. Boise State lost by 3 to Oregon.
That they should be, if you're gonna make Ohio State 2, Boise State should be 3 then.
Yes,
right.
Like what are we doing?
I know, it just doesn't make any sense.
I'm in the same because I get they wanted to rank Tennessee ahead of Bama because Tennessee had beat Bama, but you like when you start getting into the matrix of like who these teams have lost to and who they've won, you're like SMU. It didn't hurt the committee at all to put SMU ahead of Bama or ahead of Tennessee. It's like. I get it. They lost to BYU. BYU is undefeated right now. Like, it's an acceptable loss. Like, it's just...
As it stands, I think Notre Dame and Bama should both be below Boise State and SMU, and that should round out the top 12. Like, the other 7, even though I'm not a huge fan of, like, how Tennessee has rolled out, they still are 7-1, and they did beat Bama. I'm okay with them being in the top 12, but as far as like the top 12 teams that should be getting the rank, Notre Dame should be out primarily because they lost to NIU, and Bama should be out because they lost to Vanderbilt and they have 2 losses. Like that's big that you have 2 losses, right? If there were other teams that didn't have decent wins or had more losses, I would see it.
They're the only 2-loss team in the bracket.
Exactly. SMU has good ranked wins and their only losses against a conference winner, undefeated team. And Boise State, again, we talked about, is essentially Ohio State at this point. Their schedule isn't as strong, so I don't think they should be that high.
Well, you talk about SEC bias. The reason that Bama's in the top 12 right now is because they are setting it up that if Bama runs the table, beats LSU, which is going to be a tough I don't have them winning. I know I haven't sent you guys the graphic yet of picks. I know Bama's picked to win by 3 in Baton Rouge. I don't have them beating LSU this weekend. But if they beat LSU, then they get like a home game against Mercer, play Oklahoma and Auburn, and that's it. And as we can tell, Oklahoma and Auburn are not good. So it's up to Bama. If Bama wins out based upon this ranking, Bama's in because you know that Ohio State and Indiana are going to play one another. So there's a possible loss. Penn State's probably in if they win out. Georgia doesn't have to play anybody. Like, they've set the table for Bama to get in.
And I get Bama beat Georgia, right? Like, I get that is a big win. It is. But, like, let's be honest, Georgia has not been this, like, unbeatable juggernaut, right? Like they've looked weak at times. And I'm not taking away the win. It is a good win, but it doesn't overcome the Vanderbilt loss.
So here's the thing.
And a Tennessee loss.
Let's go back a year. This is I think you'll be surprised. You'll be glad that I say this. What's funny about this Bama-Georgia win is we look at it, the committee is, and by we, I mean the committee, they look at it as this great thing. Like it's this amazing win, which it is. However, from that point forward, you sit back and you go, Bama sucks. Like, Bama should have lost to South Carolina. They got beat by Tennessee. They got beat by Vanderbilt. Bama has not looked good. Yes, they blew out Missouri. That's the only time that you can sit back and go, Bama looked halfway decent. This is the exact same thing that happened with Florida State. Like, why is it that a team, like, they are the same logic that they use with Florida State. Florida State was undefeated, but they go, well, we don't like them because they don't look good, so we're going to leave them out. Bama has a great win, but since that point, they have not looked good, but we're going to leave them in. And it's the complete opposite of what they did last year.
I mean, let's be honest. Like, that win wasn't that great. The first half was great.
100%.
But that second half was like the Bama that we've seen all season. Poor.
But and to bring up your point of Georgia, Carson Beck is terrible.
Yes.
That is without a doubt, a future first-round pick by the Cleveland Browns.
Saving Billy Napier's job.
Yes. And the only benefit that Georgia's had is Georgia has not played a team that has been able to capitalize on it. Sad to say, I don't know if they will.
Probably not.
Like, because I wanted to just get to that. Like, I sit back, I look at the bracket, like Ohio State, Boise State. Would I love to see Boise State pull a shocker and Genty to run all over to Ohio State? Yeah. I don't see that happening. I've got Ohio State winning the 5 versus 12.
Same.
Who would you have Indiana, Tennessee if they played today?
You know, I can't.
I have Indiana.
I haven't watched Indiana a lot this season. I haven't. So I couldn't really give you a great answer. What I have watched of Tennessee, though, is that if Indiana plays any kind of defense and Tennessee continues this weird struggle on offense that they're in, Indiana could take it. I can't give you a good answer on that one. I can't say yes or no who I think would win. If you just put them in front of me, I would say Tennessee probably has more talent. But again, that doesn't always necessarily equate to the win. I haven't watched Indiana enough to really know what they're bringing to the table.
I get that. Alabama, Texas.
If Alabama shows up how they've always played all season, Texas wins that game. If Alabama can somehow have the same half that they had against Georgia and Texas play the way they played against Georgia, Bama could win that game. But I think Texas is a better team.
I agree with. I said this to my brother-in-law. We were talking about Bama and just sort of where they stand, and I think that this point needs to be made, which is why I think the committee may be high on Bama. When you look, because in my opinion, it's probably going to become clear as we go through the rest of this graphic. Georgia, to me, is still sort of the unbeatable. Like, it's sort of like Kansas City. You know, until someone beats them in the Super Bowl outside of Tom Brady, like, it's hard to bet against them. Bama, if Milroe plays the way he did in that first half, Bama's the best team in the country.
Yeah.
But when Milroe isn't on, Bama gets beat by Vanderbilt. Like, Bama's success rides on the shoulders of one person, which is so unlike Bama, because in the past, it was like, we can hand it off. We have all these different players that's like, if one guy's having a bad day, we can make up for it. That's not the Bama of today.
Which, based on the last 2 seasons, there's a higher likelihood of Milroe not showing up than him actually showing up.
10,000%. 10,000%. Yes. That's why they've lost to Vanderbilt and Tennessee.
Now, I will also say, for whatever reason, I feel like Texas is cursed by that same drug. Like, as good as they are and as dominant as they look, it feels like when they get into these bigger games, they still go into the game like scared. Like, they went into that Georgia game and it felt like they felt they had no business being in that game. Which, when you're going to play in the SEC, you need to have conviction when you're going into those games. Like, whether you actually win or not the point. But like, going into the game, like, we know we can beat that other team.
Georgia, Vanderbilt against Bama. Like, you could not tell me that Vanderbilt didn't fully believe that they could hang with them and beat them.
And they did.
And
right?
They did.
But like, watching that Texas-Georgia game,
wasn't there.
Texas was just like, you could tell they were like, we're just happy to be here. Like, we're glad we're on national television. I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, show up. You've played so much better football. But it was like, you had this, oh my God, it's Georgia. We don't deserve to be in this game. And again, Georgia is getting credit for their last 3 or 4 years of play. They are not that team. Not even close to that level caliber of team. But they have this air about them that they're going to show up. And it's probably Kirby, right? Kirby's probably the, like, it doesn't matter how bad they're playing. Every game they show up, they're like, we know we can beat that team. And sometimes that alone gets them across that hump.
It's a Saban effect.
Yeah.
It's, who having the head coach is a big difference in college.
And Texas is missing that piece right now for sure. So, do I think Texas is a better team than Bama? Yes, I think they should beat Bama. However, if they show up like they did against Georgia, whether Bama is good or not, they still have that confidence that they think they can beat every team, and they might end up taking that one.
I mean, I'm 100% agree. If you told me right now you got to bet the house on the game, I'm putting the money on Georgia. Or, no, excuse me, on Texas, because I don't know. I've seen too much inconsistency from Bama to ever put money on them again.
And the one thing that I would say possibly gives Texas that confidence is that they beat Bama recently.
Yes,
right?
last
like,
year.
That gives them that, like, hey, we know we can beat these guys because we already did it. Georgia was like, oh gosh, we don't know if we can beat these guys. These guys are they're the Georgia right now. Whereas like they know they can beat Bama because they already did it last year, right? So that could be the difference maker there.
100%. Notre Dame, Penn State.
I don't think either one of those teams should be in it. This should be like a Indiana,
Iowa
State type game or something like that. But dude, I don't know. Because, like, Penn State played Ohio State better than I thought they were going to play them. But Penn State also should have lost to USC. So it's like, who even knows at this point?
I like Notre Dame just from the defense. Because both Penn State and Notre Dame's offense is the same to me. It's like whether you have Aller or Leonard, it's like it's going to be inconsistent at best. Whose defense is better? Notre Dame's has played better since that Northern Indiana. Like I would take Notre Dame.
Yeah,
in the game.
That's a fair point. I could go with Notre Dame there.
So then that would leave number 5 Ohio State. We'll just start at the top of the bracket playing BYU.
I mean, I like Ohio State in that one. I think BYU keeps it way close. It'll depend on where it's at and the timing.
Give BYU a fighter's chance.
Oh, 100%. Like it's a much better game than I think people will on face value take it as, but I do think Ohio State finds a way to get the win.
Like I can see Vegas giving Ohio State like a -7, -10 spread, like possibly
a
double
disrespectful
digits.
type of line
Yes.
that BYU easily covers. And again, we hate on Ohio State a lot. However, they play certain games.
They have talent.
Yes, like that Oregon game, dude, like that was close, right? And like nobody's questioning Oregon's talent at this point. And like they played really well. You do got to respect the game at some point. And like I do think that's a perfect example. I think they get a disrespectful line. BYU comes in heated because they're like, we're not a touchdown. We're the higher seeded team. God damn it. You know, like they're not a touchdown underdog, and then they keep it close, but Ohio State ends up getting the win.
I can see it. Oregon versus
Win.
Yeah. Easy. All right. Oregon advances.
Indiana or Tennessee. Doesn't matter in that point. Like,
I agree.
Oregon's winning that game.
I do agree with you on that. Mainly because in this scenario, they most likely have played one another in it. And this is not the scenario where I see it going the other way. I think it ends the same way. Miami, Texas.
Texas.
I agree.
Yeah.
Miami's played too inconsistent on defense
100%.
and on offense. Like, it's just which Cam Ward are you going to see? Like, the offense, which is nuts because they were losing last week against Duke. Now, the score doesn't show that at the end, but at halftime, they were down. Like, this has been Miami's trend. It's sort of funny because we pick against the spread every single week. It's like every week we're like, yeah, I don't know about Miami anymore. Like they're not a confident bet. So, yeah, I agree. Texas.
And this doesn't take anything away from Miami. Like they're winning the games, and I think they're deserving where they're at. However, this is where it's like playoff games are always different than regular season games. You can't get away with the things that you've done during the regular season against these teams like Duke, like Florida State, or like Cal. Like Cal and Texas are not the same team. If you think you're gonna like get behind to Texas and then make this amazing comeback, not gonna happen against that caliber of a team. You know what I mean? So that's where, like, does Miami have the talent to beat Texas? Sure, absolutely, right? Like any given Sunday, or in this case, any given Saturday, any one of these teams can beat every one of these teams, right? Like we don't have that Georgia or Alabama this year. That's this unbeatable, like, you know, out of everybody's league. We don't have that. Everybody could beat anybody in all of these scenarios. So yes, Miami could beat Texas, but the way Miami has played, they're going to start slow. Texas is going to take advantage. Miami's not making that kind of comeback on a caliber of Texas team.
I agree. Georgia versus either Penn State or Notre Dame.
Yeah, Georgia's going to take that one. I could see Notre Dame keeping it close longer than Georgia's comfortable with, almost like the Clemson game where it's like 3-0 at halftime and you're like, what's happening? Because Notre Dame's defense is pretty good. And I mean, if Carson Beck keeps throwing 3 interceptions a game, like
the problem is Notre Dame's offense is terrible.
Exactly, right? Like that's Georgia's benefit in this game is that like their defense is still pretty good against either one of those teams doesn't have a great high-powered offense. They're probably not going to get a lot of points scored on them. So even if they're not doing well offensively, they're not going to be losing by that much because the other team can't score, right? So like that's where I say like Notre Dame could probably keep it closer than Georgia's comfortable with, but at the end Georgia's probably going to end up pulling it out like they always do.
So what's interesting is you've now set up 2 games that are rematches. You've got Ohio State versus Oregon, Texas versus Georgia. I'll make it real simple to you. Does the outcome change in either game? Or does the team that lost win both?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I've almost said this from the beginning. I think this was like my original prediction of I do think Ohio State gets the win over Oregon in this situation. Primarily just because there's just so many things. There's so many things at play in that. We've talked about it's very difficult to beat the same team twice. It's not like Oregon blew them out in the get-go. You could almost make the case, and I know Ohio State fans are, I won't make it for them, but like Oregon cheated, to win that game, and it took that in order for them to beat them. So I just think in this situation, this is one of those where the confidence that I talked about works against Oregon. They're going to go in thinking like, we already beat these guys. We're the number 1 team in the nation. We have to be respected. We're the new Georgia. Not so fast. Ohio State, I think, ends up taking this one.
And see, I don't even put it as confidence. I put it almost the other way, which I feel like works against the team is you've already beat them once. Like now all the pressure is on you to beat them again. Like, because I saw that with Bama, Georgia. It was you beat them once in the SEC championship. All the pressure's on you to do it again. It's like, and that leads to sort of the Kirby Smart talks of like, you're the underdog. No one believes in you. No one's giving you a chance this game. You have everything to win, but nothing to lose.
We've talked about this too. Like, history tends to repeat itself a lot.
Yeah.
I am not taking anything away from Oregon. They've been a fantastic team for like the last, I don't know, 10
decade.
Yeah, 10 years
Since Mariota.
Mariota, right? Like they've been really good. How many times have they won the big game?
I can only think about Ohio State. That's it.
Like they can never finish and get over that hump. They can make it and they can look fantastic. And I would make arguments that Oregon's past teams have had more talent than this current team.
Yes.
Sure. Right? So that's where I just don't see it. Like they're well deserved and they should get to this point, but it's just like there's something about the way Oregon does things that never gets them to that finish line. And I see the same thing happening.
But you said 1-1, so I'm guessing you think Georgia beats Texas again.
I do. And again, it's the until I see differently, like, and I don't know. I don't know what it is with Quinn Ewers. Like, maybe they make a change and Arch comes in and he can do something different. But, like, for whatever reason, Quinn Ewers is not showing up in these big games against these teams that matter. And Georgia's defense is just they have more experience in these situations. Like, Texas hasn't been here in a long time outside of last year.
All the pressure falls on Texas.
Yes, like they are trying to unseat this recent god, right? Like Georgia is the most recent god, even though they didn't win last year. Like they have been this unbeatable juggernaut over the last few years.
Their only kryptonite's been Bama.
Yes, and like Texas isn't Bama. They might be better than Bama. They might have even beat Bama. But at the end of the day, like Georgia does not fear you. and that is a big factor in the game. The only team Georgia fears is Bama.
Agreed.
Now, Carson Beck can lose him the game, right? Like, don't put it past him to throw another 3 picks and lose the game for him.
And
But
that to me is the only holdup to Georgia. Like, I would love to sit back before the bracket even began and be like, if Georgia gets in, they're winning. Like,
you know what's funny, dude? We gave Stetson Bennett so much crap last year about, like, people talking about he's on the GOAT mountain and all this stuff. And we're like, what are you talking about? Like, he's not that good. Like, he won 2 natties, but he was really just a guy. You put Stetson Bennett on this team,
they're winning the natty.
easy, right? And you're just like, what? Like, Carson Beck is the only lymphac. But because he's the quarterback, it's the biggest lymphac, and it really, really, really hurts the team.
Yes. It's funny that you say that, because that, to me, we talked about it last week. I just sort of look back. Even Ohio State fans, you can sit back and be like, oh, we are a good team. It's like, Will Howard's not the guy. Like, you've heard zero about Will Howard being hey, this is going to be a top-tier quarterback in this year's draft. No one's saying that. The quarterback position, has been trash this year across college football. Me and Maul talked about it in terms, or not me and you, me and Pops talked about it in terms of like NFL draft. We were talking about the Giants. It's like, you look across the board at college quarterbacks right now, like, I'm not saying there's not going to be any first round guys. And I'm not also saying that there's no guys that are going to possibly work out in the end. But am I saying that any guy I sit back and I'm like, that's the guy that should be the number 1 pick? Absolutely not. Like, there's no one there. Carson Beck on down the list. It's Georgia's, in my opinion, to lose. And really, if you want to get to the point that you're making, it's Carson Beck's to lose. They should have got beat by Florida. The problem was Florida was on our 3rd string QB. Like, if Georgia keeps getting lucky with those standpoints, then yeah, Georgia will keep winning. But eventually, in my opinion, Georgia is going to face a team that when Carson Beck looks ugly in the first half, they're going to lose.
Dude, Georgia should have lost to Kentucky.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to talk about, like, should-haves. Like, and this is my point of, like, Georgia is not this juggernaut.
Correct.
People fear them like they're this juggernaut because they have been and they haven't lost those games. But, like, Georgia is absolutely beatable. Like, I know we're talking about chaos and Ole Miss beating them. That is not some unfathomable outcome at this point. You know what I mean? Like, Ole Miss can't ever beat Bama because, again, it's Bama. And, like, Lane Kiffin has this Saban,
it's true,
PTSD about him. But, like, they could absolutely, like, Jackson Dart could play a really good game and they could go out and beat Georgia. It's I don't think it's going to happen, but it's absolutely a possibility.
Yeah.
So
and that to me is the only. I know this sounds crazy. It's the only thing that I think trips up Georgia in the playoffs.
So if a good Quinn Ewers shows up and Texas plays how we've seen them play, that earned them that number 1 spot that they had at some point during the season, they could very not easily, but they very possibly could beat Georgia.
Yes.
I don't think it happens.
The only team that I think can beat Georgia, which is crazy for me to say this, it's not crazy. It's more just like, I know this is going to sound cliche.
Ohio State?
No, it's Bama. And it's from this logic. If Bama came out of the gates like they did against Georgia, they're not letting them come back in the second half. Like, if they came out firing all, like, that's all it takes for Georgia is to get down again at Bama. It's like, it's happening again. Like, that to me is like the logical, because Georgia is the Goliath. Like, whether people want, the only reason they're not viewed as that right now is because Michigan won the national championship last year. But let's get it straight. I saw the stat on social media earlier today. Georgia is 48-0 against teams not named Alabama.
Yeah.
Like, it is clear that if you play Georgia, you're going to lose. And Saban said it best. Like, until a team outside of Bama beats Georgia, Georgia is the team to beat. Like, I don't care what the rankings say. I don't care where Georgia's at. Until Georgia loses to someone, which is, in my opinion, the only chance that Lane Kiffin has before he eventually jets his way to Florida this offseason, as I'm thinking, when they come knocking. because he ain't gonna stay at Ole Miss. Like, heads up. Like, Ole Miss only has so deep of pockets. Florida's got more pockets if they're willing to pay. Kiffin's gone. Like, Ole Miss, if you want to win a natty, this is the year because you're about to be Mississippi State. Get ready to battle for the Egg Bowl because you're gonna suck on eggs for the rest of for the next decade. It's gonna be bad. I hate it for you, but that's what's about to happen. It's tough to win. Like, you have to beat Georgia. So my question is, Georgia, Ohio State, who would you take?
Again, gun to my head, I'm taking Georgia. Like, it's a silly not to pick them.
But if Carson Beck plays bad, Ohio State's going to win the game.
I mean, as much now, we're talking a few years ago, but like we've said it. If JSN played in that playoff game for Ohio State,
they win the game.
They're beating Georgia, right? And think about like the butterfly effect of that. Like, Georgia doesn't have this allure about them anymore because they lost to Ohio State. Ohio State probably goes on and wins the Natty against, what was it, TCU? Yeah, so it's that team. This Ohio State team is not that Ohio State team. They don't have the C.J. Stroud. They don't have the Marvin Harrison Jr. and the JSNs, but they do have talent. I don't know. That one, it would be a good game. I do think, though, the difference there is Ryan Day versus Kirby Smart, and I'm going to take Kirby every single time.
Oh, agreed. Talking of Ryan Day outside of the playoff that we just been talking about, the thing that immediately came to mind was, I'm like, man, you know what type of chaos would ensue if Michigan was somehow to beat Ohio State again, be it as bad as Michigan is? Like, one, before they even announced the playoff rankings, Ryan Day's fired.
He might not even leave the field before he's got a different job, because that would be atrocious.
Michigan, I keep going back to this. Michigan, we talk about Florida State, how bad they've been. Michigan fell off a cliff. Like, which I get with like the Texas thing, like at the time, and this is where I want to say, at the time, it was a great win. Now sitting back, you're like, you did exactly what you should have done. Like, that was not a great win because Michigan's terrible. And we have to start figuring it out that at the end, and this is my thing, after the conference championships, before a playoff committee starts ranking teams, we need to take a look back to start saying, well, what were these wins? You know, you're giving credit to this team for Texas for beating Michigan at Michigan. Does it look good on paper? Yes. At the end of the season, Michigan was a terrible team. They couldn't throw the ball.
Yeah, like, if anything, though, you look back at those games and it helps explain how the season ended up. Again, at the time, you don't know this, but, like, that was a good game. Michigan was in it, right? Like, early. Like, it was a good game. So you're giving Michigan the credit because it was like they're ranked. Texas was ranked. It was this good game. But now looking at it, you're like, Michigan kind of sucks. Are we surprised that Texas has a loss now? That's how I look at it, right? Like, you use those to look back and not justify a ranking, but you go back and you look at it to go like, that's who this team is. We thought Texas was much better than they were after that win, but now knowing what we know from the past, it helps explain the team that they are. Yes, they're still good, but like, they're not as good as we thought they were, right? Like, that's what the committee doesn't do. They look at just like, oh, they beat them when they were ranked, and, you know, out of sight, out of mind for the rest of thinking about it, right? Like, they put it into a certain weighting in the ranking, and then they just let it go. But it's like, I look back at it and go, well, hey, yes, at the time it felt big, but when you look at the rest of the season, it's that hindsight, which is what I think the committee should have the ability to do, is go, well, hey, that is now just explaining why XYZ has played out the way it did, right? Like the Bama beating Georgia, or, you know, having Georgia come back on them, right? Like, that was a perfect example of going like, at that first half, there was not a single person in the country that was not going, dude, Bama's the best team in the nation. Easy. watching the second half and watching Georgia come back on Bama, you're like, Bama's not that good. Or like, what's the difference there, right? At the time, you don't really know. You're kind of just thinking like, oh, Georgia's making a comeback, or like, oh, this is the game we thought it was going to be. But now looking back, you're going, oh, that second half Bama is Bama. That's the Bama that we've seen all year. That first half Bama, who knows where that came from? Nobody knows where that came from. It's gone. It's fleeting. You're never seeing that again. But you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm talking about, though. You look back at it and you go, it explains the teams that you're seeing today. It makes sense in that regard. But you can't just take that as like in a tunnel and at face value of just like, oh, they beat Georgia, therefore, boom, it's weighted as such. It's like, no. Let's put this in perspective.
Which is why me and you have such gripes. I know this sounds like a broken record going against the CFP committee, but it's why we have the issues that we do, is because this is the whole job of the committee. They're supposed to be watching games. They're supposed to like have this like subjective view that you sit back and you're like, yeah, that wasn't really Bama. Like, this is not Bama. But yet again, the reason I sit back and I go, clearly the committee doesn't think that is because they have met number 11. Like, they still view Bama as this high-ranking team that somehow didn't lose to Vanderbilt and didn't lose. Of all the 2 ranked teams that they could have put in, that's the team they put in. Like, yeah, if you want to talk about bias, there's some bias there. I'll give you that. You know, I'm with you on that. Burn it down.
Which I just keep going back to like, well, how do we solve this? Like, what's the good answer? Like, you're sitting here bitching, complaining about it, but like, what's the answer? And I was kind of joking about it. Like, I was just throwing it out there. But the more and more I think about it, the closer we can get to how the NFL does things is the only way you can take out the bias, take out because like, I get it. Their whole thing was like, oh, we're trying to please the fans and we want the 2 best teams or the 4 best teams playing. But dude, scrap that. Like, one team or one fan thinks one team's the best, another section thinks another. It doesn't matter what fans think or like what we're trying to put on TV. But the more and more I keep going back to like, dude, take a map, you draw 12. It doesn't have to be equal circles, but
I would say 14.
Like geographical circles around the states. You get rid of all the independents and you play in conference games. You have enough teams in each conference, in each circle, to play your conference games, and then whoever wins that conference gets to the playoff. You don't play out of conference. You don't play all that other stuff. You get, and a lot of things is like, well, that would never happen because of money. Sure can. Now you got like Alabama and Auburn playing UAB, right? Or, you know, something, right? Like, you get these smaller schools mixed in with these bigger schools that can use whatever money they need by playing these schools, but it'll truly differentiate who's the best team in that conference because you've all played common opponents, and whoever's the top goes.
This is why conference championships were in college football, because it gave the conferences an out to not have to play anyone. Like, we don't have to play everyone in the conference. We'll decide that at the end. And it's like, it lucked out this year because just based upon how things are going to go, you won't have multiple unbeatens. But in the future, you're going, like, statistics applies, and statistics say that in the future, you're going to have a period where you're going to have 3 teams that never played one another who are all defeated in conference play, and you're going to have to leave one out of a conference championship, which means that team is automatically ineligible to get a higher ranking. And it's like, where do you do from that? And your point exactly. You sit back and it's like, these super conferences are bad. I will 100% agree with you on that. And that's not from an SEC bias or a Big Ten bias or anything else. It's more from the idea that it's like, you look at the ACC, Miami and SMU neither had to play Clemson. I get they both played Louisville, who beat Clemson, but it's like, both of those teams now will no longer have to play that team to advance the ACC championship, and that's mind-numbing.
Yeah, like, so it's, to me, it's not that the super conferences are really that terrible. Like, it could be done better. It's the fact that you have these super conferences, but everybody's not even playing everybody.
Well, it's because you have too many teams.
Yeah, it's like, how can you say that you're the best team in that conference and you didn't even play everybody? You left again.
Well, Indiana's going to play Michigan, Ohio State, but they will never have to play Penn State.
Penn State doesn't even play Michigan. Like, how can you say you're the best team in that conference and you didn't even play everybody? That's not how it should work.
Penn State didn't have to play Oregon. They didn't like.
It's silly. It's crazy.
100%. And that's my. I'm 100% agree with you. You need to draw a conference that says you're going to play every team in this conference, and that's why I say do away with conference championships. The NFL at the end of the season doesn't go, who won the AFC West? I don't know. These two teams should play for it.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the season. Yeah. Like, no, you all played one another. Now I get the NFL plays them twice. In college, you don't have the ability to do that. So you play them once. And it's like you said, because you sit back and you're like, well, Alabama would beat UAB. It's like, yeah, on most years they probably would. But the year that they don't, guess what? You're out.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's how it should be.
Exactly. How it should. Because then you make conference games matter. You get rid of this slop of playing like Akron and, School of the Minds of the Blind. Like, sorry, you don't get any of these easy games anymore. Why? Because they're already built into your schedule. You either run undefeated, and what you do is you open up the playoff to say like top 24 teams. 24 team playoff, I have a bracket I can send out. It's really simple. Like 8 teams get a bye, which means like, hey, top 8 conferences based on undefeateds and everything else. Those are the teams that get a bye. Everyone else has to play one another. Top 2 teams in the conference, they go to the playoffs. Because then at the end of the day, it's like, sorry, dog, shouldn't have lost to Vanderbilt and Tennessee.
Yeah.
Don't care that you look like the best team in the country. Shouldn't have lost those 2 games. You're out. Like, but this is the issue.
That's what sports is.
Yes. Well, that's what the beauty of the NFL is the NFL at the end of the day, no matter how good a team looks, if they don't win the games that matter, guess what? You're out. Like, no one sits back and argues like, oh, the Jets on paper really had the best team. Well, the Jets didn't win enough games to get in the playoffs. So at the end of the season, you know what? Everyone's like, Jets are trash. Like, there's no argument. And that's the problem in college football is it becomes so subject. That's why we hate the committee. We hate everything about it. It's because they don't follow any rules of logic.
There's also no way to actually compare the 2 teams.
Correct.
How do you say unequivocally Bama is better than BYU?
It's the same with Ohio State and Indiana. I get that Ohio State had to play Oregon and they lost by 1, but they have a mutual opponent in Nebraska that Indiana whooped up on even more. Like, I sit back and I look at that and I go, Indiana should be ranked higher than Ohio State. I get that in your mind you may say Ohio State looks better than them, but from a standpoint of what has actually occurred on the field, Indiana has outperformed Ohio State. They're undefeated, and they've beat a common opponent by more than you have.
Perfect example. The Vikings, at one point, were one of the only 2 undefeated teams. Most people would have looked at that team and said, well, I still think the Lions are a better team. But guess who was in first place of the division at the time?
The Vikings.
The Vikings. Because you know why? They had more wins. Like, that's how it goes. I'm sorry. Now, it's played itself out to where, hey, the Lions are now in first place.
Because they had to play one another.
Exactly. Like, that's the only way it gets solved is that you put everybody who's supposed to play each other in the same conference and you actually make them play.
Which is why it will never happen. And the reason it won't happen, because I've been looking at this, it's because the Big Ten and the SEC, really the super, and I refer to those 2 because they are the super conferences. You look at what's happening to the Big 12 and the ACC right now, and you're like, why is it that the Big Ten and the SEC each have 4 teams each in the playoff, but everyone else is left with these 1s and 2s? It's because they look at it as if they're inferior, which is hilarious on the standpoint of it's like, you look at the other teams, it's like, why is Iowa State out of it, but Ohio State's in, or Tennessee's in? Like, if you want to compare apples to apples of 1-loss teams, it's like, well, why is this team out? And when you get back to it, you go, oh, well, who's ESPN own? Oh, it's Big Ten and SEC. Like, why would they not want more of these schools? Like, it's about money, because the more schools they have in, the more payout they're going to have from the playoff, all the media rights. Like, heads up, in the 4-team playoff, if you were one of the 4 teams, your conference got a payout from the CFP playoff. Like, it paid to have a team represent. So when Georgia and Bama were both in, guess what? The SEC got more of a cut. Like, that's the way it played out. Like, I had an old guy tell me this once, and it literally answers just about any problem I've ever had. If you want to know the answer to something,
Follow the money.
follow the money. Follow the money. That's your answer. And that's where I sit back and I look at the playoff. I go, you want to know why it's going to work out exactly like we're saying it's going to? Follow the money.
Which is funny if you look at like these conference boomers that talk about like, oh, well, this conference is just better. At one point, and it could still end up working out this way, the Big Ten and the SEC are the best conferences, but they're led by a former Pac-12 team and a former Big 12 team, which was Texas and Oregon, which Oregon's still winning, and it could still end up working out that Texas could end up winning it. So it's just, you know, it has nothing to do with the conference. It has everything to do with the money and what gets shown on TV.
100%. Outside of that, anything else?
That's it. I think we ran it enough.
All right. Down Pull Chalks. We'll see you guys next time.